Cloyster has just been banned from Generation 5 OU, folks. But why? The Gen 5 community decided it was finally time to reel in this particular threat after many years of controversy. Believe it or not, Cloyster has a long history of causing problems in Generation 5 OU. This is a Pokemon that has always been on thin ice. We've heard Volcarona be referred to as the matchup moth for its ability to completely steamroll certain matchups and win in a single turn with ease. Well, Cloyster has very much the same effect. They could call it the matchup mollusk. Cloyster received Shell Smash in Generation 5, which was a huge buff, allowing it to achieve +2 speed, +2 attack and special attack instantly, with a tiny drawback of only a loss to some defensive stats. And with its amazing natural bulk, 180 base physical defense, it's very easy for Cloyster to find opportunities to set up that Shell Smash and just wreak havoc on the enemy. Skill Link allows Cloyster to hit the maximum number of times with multi-hit moves every single time, which leads to a huge amount of damage output. Part of the reason that the gem items got banned in Generation 5, which were consumable offensive items that boost the damage of a move of a particular type once, was because of Cloyster. Cloyster was the prime abuser of gems, with the boost from Ice Gem and Rock Gem enabling Cloyster to just one-hit KO many of its most effective checks. Back when gems were being discussed, there were a couple avenues that the community could have gone down. One of the options was actually to ban Cloyster and Volcarona instead of banning gems. So this isn't the first time a Cloyster ban has ever been considered, and most of the community thought that with gems out of the picture, Cloyster would become reasonable again, but this turned out to be false. Cloyster remained a problematic Pokemon. Generation 5 is a world where the power level is extremely high. Threats like Latios, Magic Guard Alakazam, Reuniclus, Thundurus Therian, you need some sort of answer for all of these, so it's very difficult to cover everything sometimes, and Cloyster is the kind of Pokemon that just adds fuel to that fire. When there's so many different offensive threats that you need to check for, you simply can't cover them all, and that leads to matchup variance in high-level play. But even if you are running a dedicated check to Cloyster's most popular sets, you have to be worried about its fringe options. Cloyster can sometimes run special attacks because it also gets a boost to special attack from Shell Smash, and then something like Slowbro, which is solid against the physical sets, will drop to the special options. Mixed attacking Cloyster covers those bases. Players even started to run things like Citrus Berry on Ferrothorn because Citrus Berry will proc in the middle of all the multi-hits and give you enough health to live, +2 Icicle Spear and KO Cloyster back, but at that point that is such a specific form of counterplay against this Pokemon that otherwise sucks. You would rather run just about any other item on Ferrothorn than a Citrus Berry. A defense of Cloyster is that it's a nice tool to punish sand teams because with its Ice Stab, it threatens a lot of the common sand structures, but I would argue that it punishes them too hard and in too one-dimensional of a way. Whereas something like Mamoswine also exists and is much more reasonable. Mamoswine has a fantastic matchup into sand and is an offensive threat that really applies a lot of pressure to sand. But it also doesn't win on the spot when it gets a single free turn of setup. Mamoswine is slow, it's punishable. The game isn't over when you see a Mamoswine in Team Preview. There's always a bit of matchup variance in Pokemon, but I don't think it's ever good when the matchups skew in such a polarizing way that basically just seeing an enemy Pokemon in the Team Preview means you already know that you've lost. I think that that's very unhealthy, and that's what Pokemon like Cloyster and Volcarona do create sometimes. And it is very difficult to get the Gen 5 community to agree unanimously on anything. It's an extremely divisive metagame, and there's a lot of debate about what exactly should be done to improve it. What should be preserved, how much drastic action should be taken. But I guess the one thing that most players could agree on at the moment is that they don't think Cloyster is healthy. The majority of players in a democratic vote believed that Cloyster was a Pokemon that is negatively affecting this metagame, and it is too difficult to cover in the team builder reasonably, leads to matchup variance to a degree that most players believe is not competitively healthy. There is one caveat I would like to add, and that is that the main point of data for a lot of these suspect tests is SPL, which is considered the biggest competitive singles tournament of the year. And this is a team tournament where every single generation is played. There's a dedicated player for each gen, and one team goes against another team. But the problem is that SPL is played in a best of one format, I guess because there's so many games, so to do a best of 3 for all these gens would be very time consuming, but best of 1 is definitely not as useful as a data point as like a best of 3 set. And it also means that naturally best of 1 games are going to skew more towards matchup fishing because there's only one game you need to win. So if you get the right matchup, you're totally fine. I think that the tournament format lends itself to something like Cloyster causing a lot of problems because people are incentivized to use something like that and just win the matchup rather than try to win a longer set where losing one game to a bad matchup is not as bad. Matchup fishing is riskier in best of 3. When you know the opponent is only bringing one team to your best of 1 set, it's easier to target that as well. They might bring something comfortable to them, so that's easier to predict. But in a best of 3 set, they're going to bring a variety of different things, so bringing a matchup fish is really risky. You don't know exactly when they're going to bring what, you know? So I think that's something to consider here. The best of 1 format of SPL made Cloyster more of a problem. This is something I spoke with about BKC, a fellow YouTuber, on my recent podcast episode that I had with him about the best of 1 format of SPL. And I don't mind the format of SPL overall. What I mind is the emphasis on SPL as the peak of competitive singles, when I really think it should be viewed as kind of a fun team event and not a super infallible source of data for tiering decisions like this. I know that other tournaments do factor into these decisions too, but I feel like SPL is always the central tournament that impacts tiering decisions in all gens, and that doesn't sit right with me because I don't think that the SPL format is the most competitively authentic tournament format. But despite that, I still think that Cloyster getting banned is probably healthy for the tier overall. And it's good to see that most players agree with this decision because it's hard for people to agree, in Generation 5 especially. And as to what's going to happen after this, I don't know. I think that a lot of people want more drastic change to happen. There's always a pattern with Generation 5 where something gets banned and people like the tier for a bit, there's more diversity, but then somebody figures out some broken strategy and it turns back into a very matchup heavy metagame again. It's a constant cycle with Gen 5 that makes it a bit frustrating to play as a competitor. I enjoy the generation quite a bit. I think it has a lot of identity. It's really unique. There's a lot of unique mechanics, and the Pokemon used are not used in any other generation. Many of them, but I can't deny that it suffers from a lot of the same problems time and time again. It would be nice to see us figure something out at least. Some sort of process, maybe a survey similar to what Generation 9 is doing, figure out what most people want to take action on the most and then do a suspect test, maybe. It's always good to let things settle a bit too after making a drastic decision like banning a Pokemon, so that's also fine if they want to do that. But there is currently a Smogon thread in the Gen 5 section about tiering discussion, and a lot of the prominent community members have very differing ideas about what should be done. You can read through that if you like. It's quite interesting just how many different perspectives there are on like what is the problem with this metagame? What is the source of this metagame's constant issues with balance? Some people want Magic Guard outright banned. Some people want Latios banned. Some people want Drizzle banned outright. Rain teams completely gone. I don't know about that. I feel like I disagree with that one. I like rain teams, kind of, but I don't know, folks. It's a tough thing to evaluate, isn't it? What do you think? What do you think the biggest issue with Gen 5 is if you play it? If you don't play it, I would also love to hear your biting insights. Thank you for watching, and I'll catch you later, folks.